Hello everyone, my name is Christopher Stevens, and I am presenting on a brief introduction to Heutagogy, an evolution of self-directed learning. Heutagogy emphasizes self-directed or self-determined learning. It is technologically supported education where the learner is at the center of their own learning. It was first coined by Hayes and Kenyon in 2000 to propose both an educational approach and educational theory to address gaps in self-directed learning in the context of modern digital learning resources. It is derived from the Greek word heurischein, the act of discovering. Heutagogy seeks to enable a learner to be more fully autonomous and therefore closer to genuine self-directed learning. While Heutagogy is not exclusively about adult learning, it is most relevant to them. Education, if conceptualized as being more than just a cognitive process of taking in facts, solidifying knowledge, and producing a behavioral change. Instead, the learner is conceptualized as existing in several contexts, including socially, multidimensionally, holistically, and intersectionally. This impacts how new experiences can create meaning. With new demands for modern learners, previous theories and concepts may no longer be sufficient to address new technological landscapes and expectations in their future careers. Further progression is needed. Postmodern thinkers challenge existing assumptions and worldviews with an acknowledgement of meta-narratives. Therefore, educators need to be flexible and responsive to these diverse needs of their learners. Heutagogy is on a continuum of pedagogy, or child learning, and andragogy, which is considered adult learning. It is implied it would be for adult learning, but not exclusively. Seen on the slide, you can see where andragogy takes learning beyond pedagogy, but it's still dependent on a teacher at the end of the day, whereas Heutagogy seeks to transcend this through true self-directed learning, through more autonomy given to the learner. First, we should have a brief overview of self-directed learning to better understand Heutagogy. Like andragogy, self-directed learning is self-motivated and based on the learner's needs and previous experiences. This shifts the responsibility from the educator to the learner to have them plan, identify their needs, set their own goals, and evaluate their own progress. And this is really the essence of being self-directed. It should be noted that there are degrees of self-directed learning based on Grove's model from 1991, where the level of self-directed learning is based on the learner's previous experience of a subject with increasing levels of self-direction applied proportionally to existing knowledge. So for instance, looking at stage 1, if a learner knows very little of a subject, they would be a lot more dependent on the teacher to help them navigate that. Whereas if a learner has a higher degree of a topic, they would be more stage 4 and therefore self-directed. So the less known of a subject, the amount of pure SDL applied would be at a lower level. If more is known about a subject, more autonomous and self-selecting approaches applied. Self-directed learners should seek to be more facilitators rather than traditional teachers and focus on encouraging and guiding their learners using resources such as conventional books, online learning programs, mentors, and peer networks. Where Heutagogy really comes into its own is where technology and self-directed learning start to merge. Technology-based learning has been suggested to complement self-directed learning. Self-directed learning is needed in fast-paced and rapidly changing technological landscapes, and individuals must continuously adapt and acquire new skills to remain competitive and successful, especially where distance is a factor. So there's a very specific landscape where Heutagogy is relevant. In a brief review of the literature where technology was supporting self-directed learning, it was found to give positive student experiences, such as when learning new languages, supporting professional development, standardizing professional practice. There were challenges also found in the literature, including a lack of time and quality resources. It may not necessarily inspire or motivate learners, and it might present an information overload for students. Educators, as facilitators, should provide an adequate support and navigation to help overcome these barriers. And hopefully from a nursing context, a lot of this rings familiar. It certainly was as I was reviewing it. I could identify a lot of these themes, certainly in nursing education. I would like to briefly go over the foundational principles found within Heutagogy, which include self-efficacy, capability, reflection, double loop learning, which is a form of metacognition, as well as non-linear learning. In brief, looking at capability, which is the ability to take effective action in proper conditions and apply this to both the familiar and unfamiliar settings. It really transcends the concept of competency, especially in the domain of employment, where the learner develops abilities to navigate new and unfamiliar situations, which you could see the obvious utility within a nursing context. This speaks to learning on the job, which is often beyond formal education and often necessitates self-direction and reflection. Another key concept within Heutagogy is reflection, and particularly through double loop learning, which underscores the importance of being aware of personal values and assumptions for reflective practitioners. Again, hopefully there's some bells being rung for the nursing practitioners. Using a form of metacognition, double loop learning, the process is where the learner not only retains the learning content, which is the single loop, but also how they have learned and how they can improve upon it to increase self-regulation, which is that double loop. And it is the process of learning that's important to foster critical thinking and analysis and really challenges assumptions and promotes transformation. It should also be noted that Heutagogy really follows a non-linear learning process. Technology-supported learning, particularly on the internet, online, social media, is where learners work their way through their learning needs by deciding where to find information, critically appraising it from a variety of sources. And certainly this process is not straightforward. It can be back and forth. It can be a little bit meandering at times. But the idea is that the learner, with their sense of autonomy and self-direction, makes their way through it and finds the bits and pieces they need along the way. As a quick recap, putting this back into the continuum to further understand where Heutagogy sits, when we're comparing it to pedagogy or the traditional form of education, it's the teacher deciding what is to be learned, what the goals are, how to achieve this, and how to evaluate this, regardless of the learner's background or actual needs. Andragogy pushes this a little further, recognizing that the learners have their own motivations and experiences, but this process is still dependent to a lesser degree than pedagogy on the teacher to select content, approaches, and evaluations. Whereas a key distinction for Heutagogy is that it seeks to improve the learner's learning skills on the process of how to learn. The educator seeks more of a facilitating role and provides guidance, feedback, resources, and supporting the learning through the process. But fundamentally, it gives the learner the agency of control for their learning, to move from passive recipients of knowledge to active synthesizers. Some ways Heutagogy can be applied in an education setting would be to seek a flexible curriculum to allow creativity, exercising self-efficacy, maximizing motivation, and reduce pressures usually present in more traditional forms of learning. The amount of self-direction should be titrated to the learner's needs and readiness based upon where they land on the pedagogy, andragogy, Heutagogy continuum. And this can be determined by subject matter, intellectuality of the student, and maturity of the learner. Evaluations should seek to move away from traditional teacher-based testing and be replaced by strategies such as rubric sets to measure outcomes or forms of peer review and assessment. I was able to find some publications specifically on Heutagogy in the databases, and in summary, it does increase the learner's sophistication as they develop additional knowledge, their capacity to seek it and appraise it over time. I won't go through all the specific benefits, but there is a quick overview of the way it was presented in the literature. There are certainly critiques and challenges of Heutagogy. Despite Hayes and Kenyon having first introduced the topic, they haven't really published that much in it. It's been picked up by other authors. There has been a lack of published criticism on Heutagogy, which should raise some red flags that it hasn't been thoroughly tested. And there can be reluctance from educators to move away from the traditional teacher-centered approaches, despite recognizing the importance of self-directed learning. In conclusion, there is tentative evidence to suggest that educators and learners could be well served to adopt innovative educational approaches such as Heutagogy. It has been suggested to increase learner engagement, motivation, self-direction, and reflection skills, and Heutagogy could be an ideal approach going forward to meet the ends of modern learners. And here are some of my references if you care to look a little bit further into some of these topics. Thank you very much.